check. Hello, 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 hello check. Hello, hello check. Hello, hello check. Hello, hello, hello check. Hello, hello check. Hello, hello, hello. Hello, hello check. Hello, 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 hello check. Hello, hello, hello check. Hello, hello, hello check. Hello, then the hello check. Hello, hello, hello check. Hello, hello, hello check. Hello, 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 hello check. Hello, 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 hello check. Hello, hello, hello check. Hello, 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 hello check. Hello, hello, hello check. Hello check. Hello, hello, hello check. Hello, hello check. Hello, hello check. Hello,
इंस्टा भी नहीं आ रहा, इंस्टा भी चेक कर रहे हैं। ऑल गुड ऑल गुड। क्या क्या हो गया, क्या बाकी है? फेसबुक और उस पर लाइव चला गया सर, वो आपका लिंक्डइन बस वो बैकएंड चेक कर रहे हैं, लाइव बैकएंड चेक कराओ और एक बार टेस्ट कर लो सारा। टेस्ट हो गया। हां फेसबुक पे जा रहे हैं दोनों दोनों प्रमोशन।
hello check. Hello, hello,
ये दोनों लाइव
hello check.
बस आप लिंक्डइन के पेज
Hello
पे
check. Hello, hello, hello check. Hello, hello check. Hello, hello, hello. बढ़ाओ ना थोड़ा. Hello check. Hello, hello, hello check. Hello, 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 hello check. Hello, hello check. Hello, 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 hello check. Hello, 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 hello check. Hello, hello, hello check. Hello, 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 hello check. Hello, hello. ठीक है.
दूसरा क्रिएटिव बनाना पड़ेगा। एक मीटिंग इनवाइट इसको बोलो, एक ऐसी कोई बना दे अभी के लिए, इसी क्रिएटिव को यूज करके अभी के लिए बना देना, आप यूज नहीं कर रहे हो।
मेरा लैपटॉप किधर है भाई? ला फिर दे दे सर चेक किया क्या? चेक किया रिसेंट वीडियो।
Hello check. Hello, hello, hello check. Hello, hello, hello check. Hello, 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 hello check. Hello, hello, hello check. Hello, 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 hello check. Hello, hello check.
ये कब लिया था आपने लिंक्डइन लाइव? एक्टिव है आपका लिंक्डइन पेज लाइव बैकएंड पे?
एक्टिव होने के बाद भी वो बटन शो कर रहा है, नहीं नेविगेशन।
देखना सर एक बारी सेकंड खोल के हाँ ठीक है। हाँ एक्टिवेशन की बात कर रहा हूँ मैं। हमारा बाकी सब में है, ये भी हो जाना चाहिए, कोई दिक्कत नहीं।
Hello check. Hello, hello, hello check. Hello, Hello, check. Hello. Hello, check. Hello. 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 Hello, check. Hello. Hello. Hello, check. Hello. 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 Hello, check. Hello. Hello. Hello, check. Hello. 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 Hello, check. Hello. Hello. Hello, check. Hello. छः कर दिए।
हाँ वो फेसबुक पे शो हो रहा है, वो इंस्टा पे शो हो रहा है, यूट्यूब पे हो रहा है, वो लिंक्डइन पे क्यों नहीं हो रहा? ऑप्शन ही नहीं आ रहा लिंक्डइन पे लाइव का।
छः मतलब ज़्यादा।
नहीं आप एक बार क्रॉस चेक
तो उसमें 6 रखो, उसमें 12 रखो करीब।
कौन सा
दोनों उसमें 6 का
एक
रखो।
बार ही चेक करो उसमें, बाकी सब फोल्डर्स पे कुछ बन रहा है।
उसमें 24 है। 24 18 कर देते हैं। 12 6 18 12। Hello, check. Hello. Hello. Hello, check. Hello. Hello. Hello, check. Hello. Hello. Hello, check. 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 Hello, check. Hello. Hello, check. Hello. Hello, check. Hello. Hello. Hello, check. Hello. Hello. Hello, check. Hello. क्या कर रहे हो? Hello, check. Hello. Hello. Hello, check. Hello.
बोलो।
एक काम करो ना, कोई अपना एक दूसरा लिंक्डइन आईडी दो, लेट मी ऐड दैट आईडी, मेरे को पता लग जाएगा।
इसको भी वहाँ करो ना, इसको भी यहाँ डाल दो।
लाइव है आपका वैसे हमारा तो है वो, मैं
Hello, check. Hello.
आपकी एनएससी का लोगो है, तो कोई एनएससी का बंदा करे तो समझ आ जाएगा। पॉसिबल नहीं हमारे
Hello, check. Hello. Hello.
देख लीजिए,
इसमें डाल दिया।
Hello, check. Hello. Hello.
एक दो तीन चार हटा दो।
Hello, check. Hello. Hello. Hello, check. Hello. Hello. Hello.
टेक्सटिंग नहीं कर सकते लेकिन जब तक कि वो कैलेंडर इनवाइट हमने ना जनरेट किया हो, तो हमें दूसरा
जनरेट करना पड़ेगा, करंट टाइम में करना पड़ेगा आपको जनरेट।
करवा दो ना।
नहीं फिर आप सेम
अपने
पेज
से
पर
नहीं करा
नहीं कर सकते आप, अपने से आप करोगे ना कि फिर बैक एंड फोर्थ
बैक एंड फोर्थ होगा
टेक फ्रॉम
दूसरा
अदर अकाउंट।
हमारे
इसको मत करो।
अकाउंट करने विद अदर
Hello, check. Hello. Hello. Hello, check. Hello. Hello. Hello, check. 1 2 3 check. Hello. Hello. ठीक।
टाइम पे फिर
Hello. 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 Hello, check. Hello. 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 Hello.
यार आप उनको बताओगे तो सही कि आपको एक्सेस चाहिए उनका, तो वो कह रहे हैं कि बताया ही नहीं।
ठीक है।
तो आंसर भेज दो आप, मैं कल नहीं करेंगे ना। हाँ
अच्छा वो आ रहा होगा।
Hello, check. Hello. 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 Hello, check.
हाँ जी भेज दो।
Hello. Hello.
हाँ
Hello, check. Hello. Hello.
बताओ ना।
Hello, check. 1 2 3 check. Hello. Hello, check. Hello. Hello.
किसी ने बताया कि सिर्फ
Hello,
इंस्टा
check.
फेसबुक का हमें एक्सेस
इसका
चाहिए,
फोन।
अगर आप
Hello, check.
चारों
Hello.
लाइव जा रहे
Hello.
हैं तो आप चारों का
बाबा
एक्सेस
ये तो
मांगोगे
आपका
ना।
इंटरनल
Hello,
है,
check.
मैं
Hello.
आपको बताना
Hello.
ना किस
Hello.
चीज़ का
अरे
चाह रहा
लगा
एक्सेस तो
दीजिए।
आप बताओगे यार, आप यहाँ बैठे हो, आपका मॉनिटर है।
आपको ये बताना चाहिए था मुझे कि आपको किस चीज़ पे, मैंने आपसे पूछा किस पे जाना है, लिंक्डइन, यू सेड लिंक्डइन एंड फेसबुक, बट नाउ
Hello, check. Hello, hello. Hello, check. Hello. Hello, check. Hello. Hello, hello, check.
enabled लिंक्डइन आपने एक्टिव कर दिया है
उन तीनों की मशीन
तो आप अपनी
सूरज।
एनईसी के लिंक्डइन पे जाइए
ले जा मैं उधर बोलिए
जाओ ना एनईसी की लिंक्डइन पे जाओ ना
वहीं बैठ के बोलिए
उस मशीन से
इस पे नंबर मार दीजिए नरेश सर इस पर बैठे तो बोलिए लगा दीजिए यहाँ पर ऐसे हेलो 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 माइक चेक 1 2 3 4 5 6 कैसे भैया बस कितने बजे आए हैं आप 10 बजे तो मतलब आप सुबह से आ गए कहाँ से आए हैं अच्छा मैडम इधर ही रहते हैं आप देखिए हेलो हेलो ओके है भैया का आवाज़ भी ओके है हेलो 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 थोड़ा तेज बोलिए
check hello check sound check
हेलो माइक चेक साउंड चेक
mic check
हेलो हेलो नरेश सर बैठिए ना आइए ना सर बहुत दिन हो गए आपका हाल चाल नहीं पूछे हैं इसी बार हाल चाल पूछे
मैं लिंक्डइन पे गया ठीक है मैं एनईसी पे जा रहा हूं
लीजिए तीनों माइक लग गया एक सर लगा दिए हैं और एक
प्रदीप भाई प्रदीप आवाज़ आ रही है आ रही है तो सुनते रहो फिर
हेलो
आ रही है तो सुन
प्रदीप भैया आवाज़ आ रहा है ना
हेलो चेक 1 2 3 4
hello
5 6
hello mic check hello
हेलो
तीनों
चेक
ओके हो गया
mic check
हेलो
mic check
हेलो
check
हेलो आज
mic
मैनेजर
check
को
sound
लेके आ
check
गए आप लोग
हैं
मैनेजर को लेके क्यों आ गए आज
आज कोई फ्री ही नहीं था
हेलो नहीं टूटेगा लोहे का बनाया है इसीलिए
कोई फ्री ही नहीं था हाँ, ये दाब किनका जी ना
का है?
ऐसे नहीं ये है ना
अच्छा दिख रहा नहीं सही है
ये अभी आपका नहीं लगेगा ना
एलईडी से देती है एक लाइट इधर से कहीं से देंगे क्योंकि उसमें रिफ्लेक्शन
वो वाली लाइट इधर देंगे वो वाली लाइट इधर से देंगे ठीक
ये हो जाएगा
ये वाली लाइट जब इधर से देंगे ना तो मैं इसमें लगा दूंगा और एलईडी इधर पहुँच दूंगा
दे देना पावर
एक बोर्ड पे दे दूंगा उधर और एक वहीं से दे दूंगा और वो वाली लाइट इधर से दूंगा लीजिए क्या लिखना है लीजिए पेन कितना की है 12 है ना हैं आप पेन है मेरे पेन
wherever you are watching. Tomorrow happens to be one of the most important day for many of us who have come together to discuss something on an extremely important topic. Diversity is not something new for India. India as a country, is pregnant with all kinds of diversity, be it of culture, religion, language, food, dance, music, you name it. So if there is any place where diversity should come as a habit, it has to be in India. And we are making a lot of progress around diversity, around gender diversity specifically. However, when we think about the corporate India, some of the progresses that we've made is still a little patchy. So today happens to be a day where we've got a very esteemed panel to talk about what are the challenges and what are the opportunities around making gender diversity a part of our DNA. The pandemic hasn't helped. The pandemic has shifted the priorities for corporate India. And as a result of that, who knows, maybe diversity and inclusion has taken a little bit of a backseat. So we want to use today, and 8th of March, as a reminder as to why gender diversity should continue to be a core part of our business strategy. At NEC India, we think equal. We do a lot of work around gender diversity, and as a matter of fact, 22% of our employees are actually females. In the last 1 year, we have taken 26% of all new hires as female employees. 30% of our employees have got some kind of reward and recognition last year who were female employees, and 23% of all our female employees have got a promotion last year. No wonder then that in a recently concluded engagement survey, NEC India voted diversity and inclusion as the highest dimension score with 80%. That was an improvement of 5% over last year and 3% over industry average. We feel good about it, but are we there yet? No, I don't think so. 80% is not good enough for us. We, therefore, are constantly looking at what is happening around in the industry. Where are the best practices? How are some of the people thinking about managing the challenges around diversity? So today, continuing with that listening and curiosity and thinking session, I've invited some of the most brilliant minds around diversity and inclusion around to help us understand what's happening in the industry. So let me introduce our esteemed panelist, Dr. Shalini Lal,
Thank you.
who is the founder and CEO of Unqbe, which is not just an academic but a thought leadership platform. Dr. Lal works with many C-suite CEOs and board members to instigate conversations that can lead to meaningful impact through boardroom decisions. And Dr. Lal's work and insights around future of work, as she likes to call it, is insightful to watch if you haven't already. We also have Anushree Sharma, who's the assistant editor for ETHRWorld International, and Anushree writes many articles around what is going on in India Incorporated around diversity and inclusion. She is a big warrior for equality of gender in the workforce, and we are really, really honored to have these two esteemed members. Dr. Lal and Anushree will also bring two ends of the spectrum, one from a C-suite lens, what are people thinking about diversity, and the other who's sitting at the crossroad of a lot of challenges of an operating manager, and how are they thinking about it. So we wanted to bring these two lenses to make this conversation really rich. So Dr. Lal and Anushree, thank you for your time. Thank you for being here. Can't thank you enough. This is an important topic for me personally and for NEC as a company.
Delighted to be here, Aalok. Always such a pleasure to be in conversation with you.
Thank you, Aalok, for inviting me. I think this topic is something very close to me, and it's really, exciting that, a leader who has this topic of diversity and inclusion so close to my, the heart, and then Dr. Lal, who we know is such a, proponent of diversity and inclusion. So really happy to be in the panel.
Fantastic. Let me start with something which is very simple. And actually, I like to challenge myself with that question all the time. Gender diversity or diversity can mean many things to many people. It is very interpretable, and in different circumstances, people can think of it either very conveniently, or they can exalt it to an extent where it's unachievable. Let me ask both of you, what does diversity mean to you as an industry leader, as a women colleague, as a woman herself? What does diversity mean to you? And what can we as an organization learn from what's going on in a women's colleague's mind? How do we bring this mainstream?
Lovely question, Aalok. I mean, firstly, I think for the last decade, it's so wonderful to see DEI just take so much of center stage. Last year, we had done a little bit of a research where we interviewed 42 CHROs to get a sense of what was their agenda for the year. and almost 70% had listed DEI in the top 4 or 5.
Wow.
So I have never in my fairly long career now ever seen the kind of importance that DEI is getting today. DEI, of course, means somewhat different things to different people, and I think that is what you are sort of alluding to. But here's what I think about diversity, and where it fits both the social justice and equity sort of perspective, but also what's going to be helpful for organizations going ahead. Now, starting from what's going to be helpful for the organizations going ahead, because that's really at the center of conversations with top leadership teams. As we enter a world that's changing so fast and is far more complex than any small group of people can interpret, we need diversity of ideas on the table. That's really the sort of end game. Now, in order to get diversity of ideas, what can you do? So one of the most sort of obvious answers is bring in people who've had different life experiences, with the hope that by bringing those people together into a room in a conversation like we're having today, we'll have a diversity of opinions available on the table. Now, of course, diversity of opinions is a metric which is kind of hard to measure, right? Although that's something we do, we do a sort of social capital mapping exercise in which one part is we ask people to what extent is it all right to express an opinion which is different from the majority opinion on the table around you. And to be honest, that's a very good indicator for how vibrant the organization is. Because if we just look at organizational environments, organizations which are fairly like monolithic, where there's only one broad set of ideas that are okay to be expressed, without them doing anything or saying anything, people self-censor and are very careful not to say anything that will upset people. So really at the core of it is an acceptance of we all have different ideas, and to be able to use those different ideas and create something meaningful out of it, that's an art form. Some organizations have it and they do it brilliantly. And there's one thing I'll share, because for me also this was a new insight this year, that organizations who do it well along one dimension seem to do it well along many dimensions. So underlying it is the core of, we have differences, and our differences in experience is to be valued. And if you have that for gender, you'll probably have it for minorities, of religious minorities, caste minorities, regional differences, etc. So at its absolute core, it's about, can we bring different voices on the table? So that's what it means to me.
So as cliched as it may sound, what you're really saying is that it's not about trying to go and fix a metric. It's not about going out and boasting that I've got a 30% women workforce, but it's all about the way we think. It's all about the way we are able to bring different varied thoughts, and that varied thoughts will come when you bring people with different backgrounds and different social upbringing, and gender diversity in this case that we are talking about, where women will bring completely different points of view, which by the way, I'm a big believer of. Anushree, yes, please.
Yeah, I mean, I would answer this question in 2 parts, and also want to augment what Dr. Lal said. So from the perspective of being a woman, or being an employee, I feel diversity to us means coexist with different differences that we carry. Aalok, you come up from a different background. Dr. Lal come up with different background. I come from a very different background. So how we can use those differences, leverage the power of differences to coexist and collaborate, and successfully contribute to the business or to different dimensions. This is from the perspective of being an individual. Now, from the perspective of the business, what I feel, it's diversity brings the capability of ideas, of creativity and innovation quotient to the business. And if I may quote, there was a study that was done by Boston Consulting Group, and it said that organizations which have diverse management teams were able to gain 19% more profits than any other companies. Now it shows the direct correlation between the innovation and the creativity that's driven by diversity to the business goals. And I think it's very important for industries like technology and IT, startup sectors, or organizations whose growth is dependent on innovation to really embrace diversity in the culture. Now, how we can demonstrate that? I feel the challenge lies with the mindset. We really need to understand that diversity is not one-time investment or it's just one-day campaign. While leadership are showing commitment to the diversity, but they really need to put efforts and time into different programs, into policies, and really make people accountable whether these programs or the policies that we have initiated, are they really impacting people? Are people really feel inclusive in the workplace or not? So I think that's one thing. Second is, while we are doing wonderful job by implementing a lot of activities, lot of programs, lot of policies in getting more people from different backgrounds in the workforce, giving them more flexibility, giving organizing programs so they feel more included. But are we measuring our impact? Are we measuring the impact of the programs? And until and unless we do not measure those, the impact of these programs, we will not be able to shift the needle in the right direction. Yeah. We will be, in that black hole that we feel that we are doing a lot of things, but we are not sure whether our efforts are put in the right direction or not. Yeah. So I think accountability, striving diversity, not in terms of numbers, but in terms of how we are reflecting into the culture. And third is how, we are measuring the impact of our programs are going to be the game changers. Yeah. While we are talking about creating inclusive and bias-free organizations. Yeah,
great, very, very well said, because I think one of the things in my experience, and I have moved around many countries where diversity as gender diversity specifically, and diversity as a whole has had very varied scale. Some have been a very mature market where it was very mature, very aware, and some where it was just starting, and kind of India I would say stands somewhere in the middle. But everywhere we go, there is this one ask that all our women colleagues have, is that they say, when I raise my hand, you hear me. Yeah. You don't shut me down. And that's something that I feel very strongly about. So something as small as that, I think accountability and metric can follow. But the first thing we have to incorporate somewhere is the culture of listening. In this case, we are talking gender diversity, but we can stretch diversity to a very different length and dimensions. Yeah. To say just because somebody is different doesn't mean that voice is not valued. So yeah. Great points, great points. Shifting gears a little bit, we are all, at least in India, we hope we are coming out of the pandemic. We hope it stays like this. But the last 24, 26 months has really shifted the paradigm, and everybody talks about the new normal. But what I have seen and observed is that it has specially shifted the paradigm for our women colleagues. They are spending more time at home. There is no school, so which means they have to now take care of their children, which also means they have to take care of their in-laws, their parents, and their husband, who happens to be now staying at home, who wants to have his coffee and his smoke break and everything. By the way, I'm not trying to ridicule anybody over here, but naturally the demands on a women colleague staying at home has significantly improved. And I would go on to the extent of saying that it has increased more than the men. And I'm hesitating from calling it a burden because it's also a responsibility, so I won't call it a burden. How do you all think that is impacting the diversity quotient? The pandemic, how has that impacted the diversity quotient? And what can we learn? Obviously, there's a big shift. So if we as organizations have to make policies around trying to make a more empathetic and a more listening environment, what can we do more? What are you hearing what people are doing?
I'll take 2 points that you said.
Sure.
First, the fact that it is a reality. There are many women who are juggling balls, which are, home, family, as you said, in-laws sometimes, spouse, children, and in the absence of the physical space where, earlier if you left for work, then you were sort of out for those 8 hours or 10 hours and you were not available. But your very presence and availability in whatever the home space has made it so much easier for people to reach out to you for things that you know, maybe they would have managed just fine if you weren't there. Obviously, you weren't there for so many years, and you know, life continued. But being at home, it just made that much harder. So that is absolutely a reality. In fact, a couple of days ago, I was part of a similar panel discussion where we had some very senior women police officers who spoke about how it's so important for women to also educate their families that their work is as important as their spouse's work, and must be treated with the same respect. And I think that that's a process. And I'm hoping that it isn't just the women who are sort of, you know, putting those boundaries, but it's like an equal conversation between spouses, you know, that your work's important, my work's important, how do we do this together? So, but that hasn't always happened, and that's also a reality. In fact, in the vast majority of households, it hasn't quite played out like that. But the other part I want to speak about, because it's actually very grim news. So the World Economic Forum puts out this, you know, how many years to gender parity? And they've been putting this out for the last several years. In the year before the pandemic, so 2019, they had said it would be about 100 years before gender parity would be achieved. Oh, 2020 they had said 100 years. And then by March 2021, they had revised it to 135 years.
Wow. 35
years is how far we have gone back in the first 12 months of the pandemic. We still don't have March 2022's data out. I hope it won't be as drastic, because this was horrifying. The fact that if it was going to take us 100 years in, you know, 2020, it'll from 2021 take 135 years for us to accomplish gender parity, comes from 2 or 3 big sources. One, women's political participation pretty much across the world has dropped. And that's one metric of it. The other is that in the whole reshuffle that has happened, you know, a lot of smaller organizations shut down, larger organizations consolidated. Even within larger organizations, there's some functions which have grown and some functions which have shrunk. So the impact on women has been disproportionately harsh. And even in the organized sector, the data is something like 3% of men impacted versus 5% women. So, you know, that's almost double, or, you know, whatever, 1.8 times. So whichever way you look at it, the first 12 months of the pandemic have not been good for gender parity at all. Again, I am just waiting to see what the data will come out end of March will be for, you know, this year. And I really hope we don't see 150 years now, because in the last 12 months, not sure how things have moved.
Then also begs, I mean, those are very insightful, Dr. Lal, thanks for sharing that. But that also begs then that, you know, organizations and firms have to now go after gender parity, gender equality with even more vigor and acceleration to be able to recover the lost ground, right?
And 36 out of 100 is a ridiculous amount, you know. It's like we've really slid back a lot.
Yeah, wow. Anushree, any thoughts on that?
I agree with what Dr. Lal has said, and the data that she mentioned. Is it the pandemic that have undo our effect of getting more women representation in the workforce? She mentions that the data is to bridge the gender parity has increased from 100 years to 135 years. Now, I would quote another data, which is by McKinsey and Lean organization, which quoted that in the last 2 years, women are more burnout than they have ever been, and they are more burnout than men. In fact, you mentioned that in the question. Now, the same study also quotes that 4 in 10 women also considered moving out of the workforce, then which means that the pandemic has or has undo our impact, as in the efforts that we were doing to get more women in the organization. Now, the challenge that I see, and you know, I have been interviewing a lot of people, not only in terms of diversity, but employee experience, is also that the future of work is going to be more about flexibility, more about remote work. People would be working from home. And, you know, when the pandemic impacted, it struck the world, and all the organizations shifted their base from home. Everyone was working from home. all the employers and employees were happy that, you know, we are going to, you know, work from home because that will impact our efficiency, it will impact our productivity, we will get more time to work, you know, take up our personal responsibilities, we'll be able to take care of our children and parents and, you know, family. However, in the last 2 years, we have also found that not only women, employees as whole are more burnout. According to a study by Microsoft, it was found that 1/3 of the employees feel the need to be present 24/7 at work. And then almost half of the employees said globally that to advance in their career, especially in the last 2 years, they have to be more visible, they have to work more than working hours, they have to attend all the meetings, they have to be being visible to all their peers, because they feel that they will be judged if they do not answer that specific text or a call in the middle of the night. So I think there's greater challenge emerging for the employees, and especially when we talk about diversity and inclusion, that people feel that they need to go extra mile and be visible to get that kind of advancement that they deserve for their contribution, which should not be the case.
Yeah.
Presenteeist bias is something that has increased multifolds in the last 2 years.
Yeah.
Managers, leaders, they feel that, okay, that's, you know, I can see that employee coming to office, they are more contributing, which shouldn't be the case.
Yeah.
In fact,
Yeah.
the organization should be measuring the performance of an employee through the output and through the contribution.
Yep.
So going forward, when we talk about building or augmenting our D&I policies, they should take into the consideration of people, how their performance are being measured,
Yep.
what are their evolving needs and expectations while they are working, you know,
Yep.
from home or from hybrid or from offices.
Yeah.
I think organizations need to take a more holistic approach when we talk about flexibility. They need to create policies and processes different for different people.
Yeah.
People who are working from home, people who are working remotely in different countries, or people who are coming to offices. We
Yeah.
need to look flexibility in a very sustainable manner and in a
Yeah.
long-term purview.
Yeah, great thoughts. You know, I think a lot of things have happened, and some of the statistics that you shared, Dr. Lal, is actually quite disturbing. But having said that, I am of a firm belief that the pandemic has shown us a part of the world that we would have never ever seen if it was not forced upon us. So at NEC, we are trying to make sure that we are leveraging that. We do measure success of an employee, male or female, through the contribution they are making and not by the number of hours they are.
Yeah.
Now, having said that, that's a view from my lens, right? I do agree that as it goes into the depths of the organization, there will be different implementation and different variation, right? We are not going to be there very quickly, but just to give you another example, we also acknowledge the burnout that our employees were having. And this was an idea that came from our employees, that we said that there's so much virtual and digital burnout that we just wanted one day off when there is no meeting. And we announced that as a second Friday of every month is a no meeting day in NEC India.
Very nice.
There is no meeting that is conducted in NEC India on, I can't tell you the amount of policies that we have launched. There was just one single policy that got the highest clap was this one. And that just shows how much people needed something like that. So I can't agree more, and I think that's a great learning. How do you see this more holistically? How do we make sure that we are focused on the fact that, look, there is a population of our colleagues who have actually taken back, who have gone behind. How do we bring them back? And we are moving into a completely hybrid work model where our default will be working from home unless you have a need to come to office. Obviously, we would like to put a structure behind it so that it is not misused in either way. And our going in design principle is that we trust people with their judgment, whether you work from home or whether you want to come from office. So that physical space that you were talking about, they don't have it because we were in a lockdown. If you need that physical space, the office is open for you. So you know how the tides are turning in exactly the opposite direction. People used to take a day off to be at home to find that physical space, and now people will come to office to find that physical space. So it's all in good. So I like to see the glass half full always, and I'm saying whatever is happening is probably we'll have to make the most of what we're happening. But I think the consciousness and the alertness of what the data that you all has shared is what the reason for this panel discussion is, so that we can get a little bit more aware. Just moving on, and it's a good segue to get into, comes 8th March and we all begin to talk about diversity, women, women power, gender equality, and all of that. And very soon it becomes business as usual going forward. We are committing ourselves, conducting this panel discussion live and many other metrics that we shared. I have personally, and I know that my entire leadership team is committed to making gender equality a part of our DNA. How do organizations sustain this once 8th March gets over?
So you're absolutely right. I think 90-something% places, it's, there's the IWD in March, and then there's the DEI person who's like working on it year round. And then there are maybe a women's leadership program thrown in somewhere, maybe a LGBTQ awareness thrown in somewhere. So, it's been pretty patchy, if I may say. I think, to be honest, we haven't scratched the surface of what bias is really about. Yeah. And I think about a decade ago, when unconscious bias training sort of became a norm, somehow there was this belief that this would be a magical solution, which it absolutely is not. So I think there are many core questions that really haven't been addressed anywhere. But here's what I've seen a few organizations do pretty much over the last 2 years, which I have found very, like a step really in the right direction. One of them is just the understanding that leadership of tomorrow needs to be more inclusive.
Yeah.
And that means teaching people what does inclusive leadership look like. So, a lot of these other, initiatives are for, say, women go to a women's leadership program, LGBTQ, audience goes for something there, but they aren't really influencing everybody else. Yeah. And unless the soil changes, I mean, what will the individual groups do by themselves? It's both ways, right? Yeah. So one of the good initiatives I've seen over the last year and a half is organizations, and I'm saying that because I've taught some of those programs and I was very happy that they're being done, having a series of 6-7 conversations in the C-suite, N-1, N-2, about how do we build inclusive leadership as a style. Mm-hmm. Because if to do that, we have to do many things. One, we have to firstly value difference at its very core. It's about, we have to go in saying, okay, what does inclusive leadership mean? We're going to value difference. And that's step number one. Yeah. But then it's also about then recognizing the different experiences of different dimensions of, diversity. So what does it mean? What does gender diversity mean? The whole LGBTQ movement is still fairly new in India. I think only the last maybe 4 years at max. Yeah. So what happens there? How do you work with people with very different orientations? And that itself is a large canvas. That's, not one group. There are many different dimensions within. How do you work with PWDs? How do you work with people with disabilities? Many of us have no empathy or no understanding of what that means. Yeah. So there is that element of understanding these different dimensions, and there are many more, but dimensions of diversity, to have that sensitivity and even know how, when are you being insensitive? Because most of us, don't have that radar handy, and it's very easy for us to be, say something that wasn't so sensitive just because we didn't know any better. So, there's that part of it. But then there's its absolute core, because to be inclusive in your leadership style means you have to create environments of psychological safety. That's the step one. If people are going to voice diverse opinions, they won't do it if they think that something bad is going to happen to them. Yeah. So it is about, how do you then create that? It's also then about examining your policies, because if you're recruiting, company X, fictitious company X recruits 50% men and 50% women at management trainee level, but then in the C-suite they have 1 woman and 10 men. What's going on? There is something structurally at play here beyond just the natural, So let's take a look at the structures. What's happening where? And you spoke about, giving women, let them speak when they raise their hand.
Yep.
There are these very simple tweaks, like for instance, I don't know how many people are aware that women get interrupted in meetings a lot more than male colleagues. And once they're interrupted, it's much harder for them to claim back the point they were making anyway.
Yeah.
So, these are very simple things, but the moment you have sensitivity to some of these and you then become conscious, because, most people want to do the right thing.
Yeah.
It's just that that's not something they've ever thought of. So, they may just speak over, a female colleague without even knowing that they are doing that.
Yeah.
So, how do we work with some of these, for instance? So, I think that's where it really is. That's where the real answer to this is. And I have seen the start, and I'm hoping more and more organizations sort of join that, because it's going to be, that whole piece I said about, it's a vibrant organization. When you hear different perspectives at the table, inclusive leadership will get you that.
Yeah. We're doing a lot of work around inclusive leadership, but you really provoked some thinking today for me. And I'm going to follow up on this, because I do think that as an organization, we do need to do a lot of some basic hygiene around, how do we really take a women colleague along with us in small mannerisms, in small conversations, so that they feel included and they don't feel talked over, as you rightly said. Any thoughts, Anushree? How are you thinking about it?
Yeah. So you mentioned, Women's Day is tomorrow, and a lot of organizations do a lot of things. And in fact, the harsh reality is also that around the year, I do not see many mails from the PR companies, from the organizations talking about diversity, but on the same day, 8th of March, my email address is being bombarded with a lot of organizations about talking about their diversity program, that they hired 5 women or they hired few people from the LGBTQ community. But the point is, like I mentioned, D&I is not a one-time campaign, it's a work in progress. So I'll give you an example. Last year, I led a research with my previous employer to measure the progress that we have made in D&I with respect to gender equality at workplace. So 79% of the organizations around the APAC region, they said that, we see D&I as a priority for organization. In fact, you mentioned about the research. The organization said that we have a commitment towards D&I, it's a priority. However, 59% organization, the same organizations, said they do not have a right strategy at place. And why is that? That's a huge gap. Like 79% are saying we have, it's a priority, but 59% do not have a strategy. And while we were going through the research and the analysis, we found that this stems from the fact, the gap stems from the fact that most organizations see their workforce sufficiently diverse. I mean, how do you define sufficiently diverse? Have you put some numbers that, in the organization of 100 employees, we will have 20 women and 80 men. Will you call it a diverse organization? No. So I think the mindset of assuming, because we are doing a lot of, putting a lot of efforts, doing a lot of programs, will create an inclusive workplace, then that's not a case.
Yeah.
I think the second point that I want to make is, while you have a strong policies around D&I, you have equal opportunity policy, or you have some metrics to achieve your D&I goals, but how strong is your escalation or governance process when it comes to D&I? Dr. Lal mentioned a number of bias that women has to go through, and there are a number of different communities. People face different sort of discrimination and bias at work, but they still feel scared to raise their concern to their managers or to the leaders. They are not confident about the aftermath. They feel that, either we will get judged upon raising these concerns, or maybe, the person maybe who is a leader, who is discriminating, will take actions against me. So we really need to have that strong escalation and governance process. And the last, that I also agree with Dr. Lal, what she said, we need empathetic leaders to really drive this kind of transformation at the workplace. Until and unless we do not see our leaders taking the lead, empathizing with the needs of the evolving workforce. See, it's a market that we are living in which is employee driven and not employer driven. We see great resignation happening, And that's because the needs and expectations have changed, and people would not shy away from moving out of your organization to a competitor if they find more empathy and trust from different employer. So we really need leaders and managers who are empathetic towards the needs, who can build the trust, and who can create a workplace where people feel belonged. Yeah, so that would be my take.
Fantastic. Great insights. And I think actually you all have answered my next question, so I'm going to shift the gear. My next question was actually about what are some of the best cultural practices that we can learn from the vantage point that when you were talking to the C-suite, if you're talking to the operating managers, what are some of the cultural pieces that one can incorporate in making a safer, more protective zone for our women colleagues? And I think you all have just answered that question, which is policies, processes, education, training, learning, conducive environment, etc. So let me ask you a different question. So, we've spent the first maybe 40 minutes just talking about what organizations need to do about creating the right culture, the right catalyst where women colleagues can feel protected, safe, raise their hand, and be who they want to be, rather than worrying about what the other person is thinking who I am. Equally so, just like for men, or for that matter any other individual, there is a part that every individual will also have to play in navigating the organization and navigating their career. As senior colleagues in the industry who have navigated your careers, who've spoken to many people, what advice would you all give to our women colleagues on how should they shape their career? Because I get this question asked a lot. It's not an easy question to answer. It's not a checkbox that you can do, but women to women, if you were to give that advice to our women colleague, what are the 3 or 4 things that they should do besides fighting with their men colleagues? What are the 3 or 4 things that they can do to really shape their career, to make their voice heard? And maybe there's some takeaways that we as an organization can have to make sure that we provide that ecosystem, that when we see a women colleague trying to strive for that, we open the path for them. So I would like to hear from the 2 of you.
I think once women connect to their inner strength, they're pretty unstoppable. I mean, pretty much across my career, I feel that. Unfortunately, we have a number of social barriers coming in the way of making that connection. I mean, you can almost see it in a woman when she's connected with her inner strength. It has just this
radiance.
Yeah, there's this power, which just comes from being plugged right into the source, if you like. Yeah. Now, but there's this sobering reality that for the most part, our understanding of men's role in the world and women's roles in the world is set by the time we are, 5 or 6 years old.
Yeah.
So it's always there at the back of our mind, that social conditioning which comes in the way of, people's own, hesitation about a lot. And if I could give one advice, it would be, it's not you, it's the internalization, just throw it out. Yeah. It does not belong to you.
I know that we may be, but I do want to take that example that you shared with me earlier on how 5-year-olds were given to draw and how they colored. Could you please share that with the audience? Because that would help them understand how they have to break the shackles.
Oh, God. So this research happened, it was actually at Harvard in 1998, where a team of researchers wanted to see how does stereotypes impact performance. It's a very, interesting question. And the first study was, let's examine gender and Asianness, because in the US there is the stereotype that if you're Asian, which is like Chinese, Japanese, Korean, etc. descent, you'll be better at math. And then there is the other stereotype that if you are a girl, you won't be as good at math. Mm-hmm. So this was a study which called in 81 children, girls, and they called them in to do a maths test. And then they were divided into 3 groups. One group was given this drawing of a kid with a doll. The second group was given a drawing, they had to color this drawing, of 2 kids eating noodles with chopsticks. Mm-hmm. And a third group was given a landscape, which was pretty neutral, right? The findings from that study were absolutely astounding, because all the girls, not all, on an average, the girls who colored the drawing of the girl playing with the doll did poorer on the maths test than the other two groups. And guess who did the best? The girls who colored the image of the kids eating noodles with chopsticks, because it activated their Asian identity. So, you know, that study was replicated some 350 times, including at Ashoka University right here in Haryana, where the prime was just a simple question: what does your mother do? 10-year-olds, when asked what their mother did, they performed poorly on a maths test. Why? Because it immediately activated deeply held internalized beliefs that they do not know. If you asked any of the kids, why did you get X number of marks on their maths test, they would never be able to correlate it with that.
Yeah.
But what this study, or this basket of 350 studies, teaches us is that across the world, women and men, by the age of girls and boys rather, by the age of 5 or 6 have already internalized the role of men, the role of women. So now, by the time we come to the workplace, we are not fresh clay.
Yeah.
We are working with deeply, deeply ingrained beliefs that we are not conscious of.
Right.
And everything builds on top of that.
Wow, that's really insightful. And the reason why, sorry, I may have interrupted your thought,
No,
but the
that's
reason
fine.
why I wanted to draw that out was that I'm of a firm belief that we all, men or women, boys or girls, work with a lot of shackles. And it can be extremely powerful if we are aware of what those are. Sometimes, many times you may not be, but if you are aware and if you work towards breaking that, then this glass ceiling can be broken multiple times over. So I thought it was very useful. It would be very useful for our viewers today. Anushree, coming back to you, what would you advise for younger population, working women, mothers, young mothers? What should they do differently?
Yeah, so I was first pretty scared about the question because I haven't really spent that much years in my career. It's just like 5 years into the professional job.
That's why you are the right person to answer this question.
Yeah. So, but what I have understood, I have been hosting these panel discussions, and then there are certain events where we are talking about, how do you promote women in tech, or how do you promote women in this sector? How do you avoid bias? One of the key things that I have learned from these different panelists, or in fact my CEO from the previous organization, what said that always seek out role models in your organization. Do not ever hesitate to ask for help. Most of the time we just felt isolated, and we felt that this is our responsibility, we'll just put our mind into it, and we never think that okay, I can seek help from this colleague or that colleague. So that thought do not really come into our mind, especially women, and we feel a little anxious reaching out to people to help us. So I think that's the learning that I take away from my managers and CEOs, that always ask for help. Second, always be open for the feedback. Always take feedback. I think feedback is something that really empowers your own personality and your growth. And third is, and the last, we are talking about bias. International Women's Day theme is break the bias. But more importantly, rather than expecting other people to break that bias for you, are you breaking that bias for yourself? I mean, women have a lot of bias within themselves. Even if they are being rewarded, they will say, oh, that is because my manager identified that talent in me, or that's because of my manager, I am thankful to that manager. But it's your hard work too. Why don't you praise yourself? So I think that's the major learning that I have gathered from different women and different men also, that do not have that self bias in you. Do not go that hard on yourself. Do not criticize that much. Always embrace your differences. Always embrace your the ideas, and do not feel shy away from sharing those ideas to everyone.
So in other sense, you're also saying how to break a shackle, which
Yeah.
is your personal bias
Yeah.
or unconscious bias.
Yeah.
You know, I have always learned from my career that men or women, more so for women, because we are talking about gender parity here, is that if you don't let your voice heard, somebody else will fill your voice, and then you are not in control of that. So you should have an opinion. Thankfully, not a stupid one, but you should have an opinion and you should voice it. And then, if the organizations or the room doesn't appreciate it, then there is a way that the culture needs to be answerable for it. So you can't expect, or well, it's a little bit of a chicken and egg, but what I struggle with is what comes first. Should I first prepare the culture for people to open their mouth and speak up, or should we get people to speak up and culture should protect them? And I think it's a little bit of both. So here's a reach out from my side for everybody that is watching this, is that let's make this handshake. As much as organizations will try to reach out, and I personally at NEC will try to reach out, I think the handshake has to happen from the other side as well. I can't thank you both enough. It was a short session, but extremely insightful. And you know, we've learned so many things, and I started with the most important question, I ended with the most important question, which is, what is, you know, Mahatma Gandhi once said the change starts with you. If you want to change something, it should start with you first. And I'm not saying anything that needs to be changed which is bad, but we also have to constantly change ourselves. So here's a request to everybody who's watching it. Be the person you want to be, you know, and the organization has to rise up to lift you up. Break the shackles, break your unconscious bias, and the others need to break their unconscious bias on their parts too. I think the organization, we've learned, needs to do a lot more. We are getting there, but we need to do a lot more in creating a structured, methodical, and a thoughtful, sensitive process around how are we bringing diverse group of people to be able to speak up and talk more openly. You know, create a culture where it's okay if you are wrong, because it's not like men are right all the time, right? So we are wrong many times as well. So how do we open up the aperture to get more conversations going? And I do like one strong follow-up that I will have, that I am personally taking on myself, I've written it down, is how do we create a structured awareness program where we can appreciate our women colleagues? And if I have a sister and I can deal with my sister in a certain way, that does not mean I can deal with my colleague in the same way. It's an important demarcation you should have. And you know, you may go for a smoke with your women colleague, and you may think it's cool, and she may not like it. Are we aware of that? You know, and I think these are some of the things that I would leave behind for all the male colleague and industry peers and audience who are watching this, is that I think we've got to kind of come to a middle ground and create that magic handshake for the betterment of society, not just for our organization. Dr. Lal, thank you so much for your time. Anushree, it was really delightful to have both of you over here. I have learned a lot. I think some of these things were there, but you guys have just ripped the bandage open as to what needs to be done. So thanks a lot for your time today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Aalok.
Aalok.